I got all I want, and I got all I need, and I got everything. I got you and me. All I want, I got all I need.
Marriage is the best. Hey, welcome back to Marriage is the Best. We're glad that you've joined us to talk today about the little things. Marriage, if marriage was a game, is really won and lost in the littlest moments of life. And if you can be really good, be really mindful, be really intentional with the little things in your marriage, then you can build it up into something that is really meaningful, really fruitful, really beneficial, and really fun. And so today we're going to talk about how do you do the little things well, and what are all the little things in marriage that make it either grow to be really, really strong or to kind of fade away. One thing that came up in session this last week was the idea of greetings. So how do you approach your spouse when you're kind of like saying hello? How do you leave your spouse when you're saying goodbye? And how these little moments are actually really important and have the potential for building up the marriage or causing a lot of stress, which does which harms the marriage over time. The foundational principle that we're dealing with here does come from John and Julie Gottman, because what doesn't come from John and Julie Gottman when it comes to marriage and research as the 5-to-1 ratio. Okay, so the reason that the little things matter is because when we look at marriages that are successful and full and satisfactory, they have a certain ratio of positive to negative interactions. So John and Julie Gottman, in their Love Lab, they discovered that marriages that function well and are on their way, that was the phrase that was supposed to be stated there, and are on their way toward marital intimacy and connection, have a ratio of 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative. And when that ratio gets interrupted or becomes unbalanced, the 5-to-1, they were able to observe that created a much higher likelihood for divorce. And so when you think about kind of a greeting or a departure from your spouse as an opportunity to increase your ratio, you may recognize that having a system for both greeting and departures in your marriage will allow for you to increase the ratio that you have in your marriage day by day. So in the morning, as you are getting ready for work, do you have a system for connecting with your spouse in that moment? Whether they are asleep or not, whether they are, they have already left or you are the first to go, do you have some sort of mindful practice in that early morning state of connection with your spouse? So it could be something simple, right? Like if they're asleep, don't wake them up. Sleep is important, but you could write a note. You could shoot a text. Hey, just thinking of you this morning. Hope you have an awesome day. I know you've got a big meeting. Just know that I was thinking about you when you get this or when you get up. If you are both awake at the same time, there's always the opportunity to provide a verbal, positive verbal connection by just saying, literally just greeting them with a good morning. You can be physical, right? Like there could be hugs or kisses involved to, again, build up that sense of positive connection and build out the idea of a 5-to-1 positive ratio. So now fast forward, right? What if you are coming home from work or coming home from anything and it's, you're seeing your spouse after a period of time? Again, there's an opportunity for connection. There's an opportunity to be intentional and mindful of coming back together and creating a ritual of greeting each other with warmth, with kindness, with a pause, right? Oftentimes in our lives, we're moving so quickly and there's so many things going on in the lives of people today that it's really easy to miss those little moments, right? So in a normal situation, let's assume there's some children involved, there's some sports involved or something like that. You are getting home and there's something that needs to be done, right? Like you're not getting home in a vacuum. I hope you're not getting home in a vacuum. That would be very uncomfortable. But you're getting home and you have an opportunity to turn toward your spouse and create, this moment of connection. And normally if you get home and there's something that you got to run off and do, something that you're thinking about, stressing about, like, oh man, when I get home, I got to do X, Y, and Z. It's really easy to miss this transitional time and miss an opportunity for creating a positive connection. So you get home and maybe you say hi to the kids, or maybe your kids are young enough that they run to you, or maybe they're old enough that they're not even there. Maybe they're in the in-between where they really need you to do something for them, right? In any state of the marriage, in any state of the relationship, you can intentionally create a moment of connection with your spouse. It doesn't take a lot of time, and it doesn't even take a lot of energy. What it really takes is A, a little bit of mindfulness, and B, practice. So if you are mindful enough to know, hey, here's another opportunity to slow down, to make a connection before we move into the next phase of the craziness. That B part is to practice, right? You need a system, you need a habit to be formed around the greeting ritual or coming together ritual. Growing up, I remember my dad coming home and opening the front door and saying something to the effect of, "Hello, honey, I'm home," something like that. And he would say it in the same way with the same intonation every single time. And I thought it was really endearing. And it's actually something that I have done a few different times. I don't do it every time I walk in the door. But I just remember him doing that. And it reminds me kind of this, this idea of a ritual of greeting. Talk to your partner about creating a moment, either when you are coming together or going apart. Talk to each other about what you might want that to look like, whether you want it to be a kiss or a hug or a word or a question or a little check-in. Those greetings, if made positive, can really help in creating a sustainable system. When the greetings and the partings are not thought of, it often leads to disconnection, and it also has the potential to greatly increase your negative interactions. Let's do a little bit of math. If the ratio that we're looking for is 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction, that means that if we can avoid a negative interaction, we can decrease the number of positive interactions required to keep our ratio healthy. Okay? So if you create a positive interaction ritual around coming together or leaving, you will be not only contributing to the 5 positive interactions that are going to make your marriage healthy, strong, satisfactory, and intimate over time, but you'll also be decreasing the number of negatives. So if marriage was simply a math equation and you had an opportunity to build up one side of that equation into a healthy level, starting with greetings and partings may very well make the difference, whether by reducing the number of negative interactions, which then would require a great deal of work to create positives on the other end in order to balance the equation, that 5-1. Not only are you doing that, but you're also increasing your number of positive interactions, making the positive side of this equation stronger, and decreasing the need for intentional positive interactions later on. Now, am I encouraging people to get their positive interactions in and check them off like a list in order to not have to interact with their spouses? No, I'm not doing that. However, if marriage were simply a math equation, that would be one of the strategies in the game of marriage. Now, marriage does not happen to be a game, and marriage is not a math equation. So feelings and emotions and hormones and all sorts of fun things are going to get into the way of the math of it, right? It's not simply math. However, if it makes sense to you to prioritize those positive interactions so that you can continue to right the ratio and decrease the number of negative interactions so that you can right the ratio, then those mindful, intentional acts, if done out of a heart of love and care for your spouse and not out of a gamified version of marriage, then it's going to work for you. It is going to yield a positive result because you're putting in the work to engage with your spouse and make those ratios, positive. Greetings is just one area of the positive, the 5-to-1 ratio. And so let's talk a little bit about other different things that create positive interactions. There's some really small, simple things that create positive interactions. They could include something simple as smiling or saying thank you, showing a little bit of affection, listening with empathy or giving a compliment. Laughing together is a really strong positive. Examples of negative interactions would include things like criticizing, eye rolling, dismissive comments, sarcasm, stonewalling, or ignoring. Any of those negative interactions are going to increase the negative side of this ratio. And the small positive interactions, those little things that add up over time, are going to help you in building sustainability in your marriage. This week, I ran into a couple that was really struggling in implementing some of the small little things day to day. They're busy, they're super busy, and they've just got so much going on. And they have this system, right, that they've established that's just really difficult to break into. And so across the time that we've been working together, they've learned a lot and are, struggling to kind of put those things that they've been learning and engaging in into practice. And so one thing that came out of the session this last week was that the greetings in the marriage were lacking, right? They were quite negative. And there were some examples given of negative interactions within the greetings that ultimately kind of derailed certain moments in the marriage that could have been oriented toward connection were actually oriented toward disconnection. And really, it was due to a lack of a system surrounding how do we greet one another and how do we leave one another, how do we part from one another successfully, so that the fruit of our greetings and our partings are really sweet and they don't create bitterness between us. So for Becca and I, one thing that I try and do and be kind of really mindful of is when I leave her in the morning, there's a moment where I always try and just give kind of a physical affection, a moment of a hug, or, we have a weird thing where we squeeze each other's hands to communicate. We developed it when we were dating. So if I squeeze her hand 3 times, she knows that means that I love her. And so I'll do that pretty often, just like, grab her hand, squeeze her 3 times and head out. And she's usually awake because, number 5 usually is up at around 6 these days. So when I'm leaving, I'm trying to create a connection point, right? I'm trying to communicate physically and affectionately that I see her, that I'm thinking of her, and that's kind of one of those rituals that helps to increase our positivity and our ratio. when I come home has been a little bit more difficult in our marriage because we haven't really established a very clear pattern, because this is one that we've practiced a little bit less and have been less consistent with. Our marriage could really use a more consistent greeting ritual when we're coming back together. The things that we've tried in the past have included like sitting down and chatting for a couple of minutes and just catching up on people on our days. They've included, hugs. They've included kisses. They've included little affections. They've included, smiles and greetings some days. Oftentimes, some things that have gotten in the way of our system is basically just like the fatigue of the day. And so Becca at the end of a day is so worn out most often that it's very difficult to create like a moment of greeting. And so there just has to be a lot of grace around some of the coming and going. But if we were more mindful about talking about it and not setting an example, I was thinking setting an example for kids, but like setting a standard for each other, setting a standard for our marriage, and really leaning into like what we want our greeting to look like. Like for me, I think just like holding each other for 20 seconds would be really nice. Get some of those chemicals flowing and just like feel really connected. That could have sounded really sexual, but I didn't mean it sexually. I meant it more like physiologically. Anyways, so something like that. And then for Becca, the thing that matters most to her is just spending quality time connected in conversation. However, oftentimes when I'm coming home, she's so tired that a conversation is not the right moment. And so there are times when we have to kind of defer that greeting or that type of connection to later. But that doesn't mean that we can't have a really strong, healthy greeting ritual so that both of us are feeling connected in those moments when we're coming together. So yeah, ask your spouse about greetings. Ask your spouse what would make them feel loved when you're leaving in the morning. If it's not shaking them awake and giving them lots of hugs and kisses, then maybe it's something else. Maybe you can be creative in approaching your spouse, whether it be writing something down or sending them something sweet, letting them know that you've thought of them by, doing something for them, an act of service, a gift. So yeah, as a way of increasing your ratio of positive to negative interactions, create a ritual of greeting and a ritual of parting, and it will bless your marriage over time, and you will definitely benefit from any amount of mindful work that you do on that. Marriage is the best.
I got all I want, and I got all I need, and I got everything. I got you and me. All I want, I got all I need.
And by taking two negatives off the table, the greeting negative and the parting negative, you can decrease the number of positive interactions that you're going to need in that day by a very substantial amount, right? Not only are you decreasing the necessary positive interactions by 5, but you're also increasing your positive interactions by 1, which then carries over, the math of marriage, right? Carries over to forming connection based on other negative things that may come up. I don't know if I like that section about math, but the ratios make sense in my brain. What about this? The foundational, and when the greetings and the